Hi and welcome. In today's video, we're going to see how we can use DTOs on our Spring Boot application. But in the first part of this video, we're going to see first what is DTO, data transfer objects, and why we should use that. And in the second part of the video, we're going to see in fact how we can implement, how we can use DTOs on our Spring Boot application. Let's get started. So as I said, the first part of this video is to give you some concepts about DTOs, right? So what is DTO in fact? DTO stands for Data Transfer Object, which is pretty much a simple object that you use that in your application to transfer data between layers of your application, right? So let's think about this. Let me scroll down a little. Let me get these. So you have layer A, for example, and you have layer B. And then you are going like to, let me change that to white. So you are going to consume some method. Oh, not font. No, this how it works. So you're going to call a method on layer B, okay, from layer A. By layer, you can think like controller, like service, like repository, or whatever layer you have in your application. So let's say layer A will call a method on layer B, but this method responds like in a domain. Here, not you. In a class, a domain that is defined on layer A. So wait a minute, layer A depends on layer B. But in order to layer B to respond, it depends on layer A. What is this? This is a circular dependency, right? So your application won't start, or even it starts, it's pretty bad, right? So what can we do? We can externalize this kind of domain. By domain, I mean just a class, okay? An object. In something that we called, how we can call an object to transfer objects between layers, right? To transfer data between layers. Oh, we can call it like data transfer object. Oh, that's pretty good. So in order layer A to call layer B, it's okay. Layer B will return on a DTO. Actually, we return a DTO, and layer A will also know this DTO, right? So now layer B can respond to layer A without having the circular dependency, because both depends on a same external asset, let's call it this way, that is our DTO. So that's basically why we need DTOs, to avoid circular dependencies. This concept of DTO is widely used on multiple layers of your application, right? Here on the top, we are going to see that on the context of a REST API, which is used to map requests and responses from your controller, which is also widely used, right? So actually, circular dependency is one of the problems that DTO mitigates, okay? But what is in fact a DTO? Let me see the code, right? DTOs are defined by a simple Java class with attributes, getters and setters, constructors, toString, because of hash code, and that's it. You know, there is no like some method. It can have, okay, like to map like between DTO to an entity. We will see that in a few minutes. But the concept is just like having a really simple Java class. And by the way, it normally has the suffix of DTO. Here in the right side, it's just an example using record. If you are using Java 14 or higher, you can use records instead of this kind of class. But for DTOs, for the concept of DTOs, they are pretty the same. Okay? Super cool. So let's take a look on this example in specific. So here, as you can see, this is a REST API, right? We have the controller, we have the service, we have the repository, and then database. But here you can see that controller and service are under the DTO part, and part of the service and repository and obviously database are under the context of model. So here is the thing. The client makes the request. Using a DTO, we are mapping our request of the controller as DTOs, like we have a Java class. Let's say we're going to create a DTO user, with like username and password, right? Let's imagine we have the getters and setters here, okay? Getters and setters. So this would be our like user create DTO, right? So we can expose and expect that on our controller. And then we are going to pass it to service. Service will do the mapping between DTO to our internal database entity, and then ask the repository to persist that on database. And then database will return with the persisted one, and then repository will return to service. Service will map again to the DTO, and then we're going to return that to the client, which is pretty good. But here we can also have a problem right now. So because this way, if on the response, the service is going to map with this same DTO, let's remove the create part of here. What happens? We are going to return the password of the user. In this case, it's for that user specific, okay? But imagine a route like get users, get slash HTTP get slash users. So you're going to return a list of users with the password of users. So this is the first concern when we are developing REST APIs not using DTOs. We can expose some sensitive data that is mapped, that is stored on our entities, right? So that's why we should avoid returning our entities directly, right? Because yeah, as you might be thinking, like it would be way easier to just return the model and we can get rid of this and then make something like this, right? Oh, sorry. To front. And that would work, obviously, 100%. But in this case, we can end up like returning the password of the users or even return internal metadata, internal ID, or anything else. Besides of that, we have another concern by doing that. When you do this, like map your controller to request and response of the REST layer as your database model, your database entity, you are locking your API contract with your database design. And in the beginning, it can seem to be okay, but API contracts are live, right? We often change that. We often change the version of our API and remove or add some attributes or even update the type of an attribute. So how would be possible to us to make that if we are just using our database domain, our database entity? We would need to change our database in order to change the API. So this is very hardcore and we should avoid that at all, right? And so this is the second concern, right? The first one is security. The second one is API contract. And the third one, if you have been working with Hibernate for a few years, you probably already get some lazy exceptions. Hibernate lazy loading exception. Yeah, this is, you see, oh, this is in Portuguese, my bad. But this question has been asked 11 years ago. 11 years ago, people are facing this kind of problem. So when does it happen? It happens when you have like a relation on our entities, like one-to-many, for example, and which is pretty common. And then we are trying to return that entity which has this relation one-to-many. And when we are going to return that, we need to grab this one-to-many relation and select on the database. But in that moment, your context of the connection of the database, not the connection itself, but the session, the Hibernate session will be closed, and then you cannot grab that information anymore. So you end up with some lazy loading exception. The lazy loading is actually a concept of Hibernate, like, because in Hibernate we have lazy and eager loading. You can take a look the difference between them. I won't get into this right now because isn't the focus of this video. But basically, it is the lazy. The lazy, as the name suggests, is like it will await to load the information and will only load when it's necessary. So in this case, we are going to ask for the lazy loading when we don't have any more, we don't have the Hibernate session open anymore. So that's why we will end up with lazy loading exceptions. That being said, so now we have three concerns, actually four, right? The first one, my bad. The first one is circular dependency that doesn't depend on API stuff, on controller service and repositories. It's about any layer of your application. The second one is about API, which is security, to not expose directly your entities on a controller in order to avoid exposing sensitive data. The third one is about API contract, to do not lock your API contract with your database entity. And the fourth one is about lazy loading, for example. We might have some other ones, which I don't remember right now. So let's get into the code and see how we can make the use of DTOs on our Spring Boot application. As usual, let's start with Spring Initializer. I will use Maven, Java, Spring Boot, whatever, like IO, IG, Venturelli, DTO example, blah, 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 packaging jar, 17, dependencies web as usual. I will use H2 as well, and JPA. If you don't know H2 database or Spring Data JPA, you can check out this or this, I don't know where it would be, the link of a video explaining how to use H2 database, which is in-memory database, using Spring Data JPA in order to access your data on database. We are going to use this on our example, so you don't know about it, stop this video, take a look on this other one, and then come back here, okay? And that's all. Let's generate that. Okay, I just imported into my IntelliJ. So the first thing we need to do in order to connect to our database is to set up our connection. Again, if you don't know what I am doing right now, stop this video and go to the other one and check it out. The second thing is just to define an entity for our application. In this application, we're going to register users, okay? Just to make it clear about exposing sensitive data, like in this case, the user password, okay? So by that, I will create a class called user. So that's pretty much, so we have some attributes here, including the password, getters and setters, and that's pretty much, right? Another thing that we need to do is to create a repository, and call it as user repository, which extends JPA repository of user and long. And now, in order to make the request payload to create a user, let's create the DTO for that. For that, I will create the package called DTO. And in this case, as we are using the DTOs to map requests and responses of your controller, you can store your DTOs like under the controller package or having a like root level DTO package. Is up to you. Okay. So let's call it create user DTO request DTO. And instead of a class, let's make use of record, right? And here we have name, email, and password in order to create that user. So we can do some like user response DTO. Oh, I create a class, not a class, I run a record. Then we have the name and email. Okay, so now what we need to do is to create a service, call it as user service. And I will annotate that with service, which already includes the component annotation. Okay, so if you don't have that, Spring wouldn't be able to inject it in our controller. So here we have the dependency of the repository, which makes sense. We are going to inject the repository by our constructor. We have a method like to create a user. By that, let's take a look on this. We expect to receive a create user request DTO, and then we are going to map that into our model, right, on our entity. And then we are going to store that on our repository. And then I have a simple method here, toResponse, which will make the mapping between our entity to our response DTO, which doesn't contain the password, right? And also we have a get user by ID, which expects an ID here. It will search on the database. If we don't have that, it will throw a runtime exception. Otherwise, it will also use this method and return with with the DTO response, right? Now let's create the controller package. And here we are defining a REST controller, request mapping / users, having a dependency of the service, and then getting injected by the constructor. We have a post mapping, right, to create something. So we expect here, take a look on this, request body to be the create user request DTO, which has password. And then we are calling the service and just returning the response DTO, and also the get user by ID, expecting to receive an ID and calling the service, right? Before that, that's pretty simple, but let's make something different. For the first run, we are going to run without the DTOs, okay? So let me do something like this. I will have this commented, and let's do something like public user create, and then yeah, we can like create user. Let's call it request. Let me get this. Okay. And let's just return like repository.save.user. Okay, so in this case, we're going to return our model. Also, let's get the like public user find by ID, long ID. Let me copy this. Okay, that's pretty simple. And let's make our controller to use that as well. So the post mapping here, it will be, let me copy that. But here it will be a user. And then let's like create and then user, like user. And then let's respond with user, right? And for the get, let's do the same thing. User, get by ID. I think it's find by ID or get by ID. How did I define it? Find by ID. Okay. And find by ID, just return that user. Okay. So yeah, let's run our application and let's see what happens. Like Maven, Spring Boot run. Oh, okay. Yeah, let's see what happens here. Okay, so it looks to has started. Let's take a look on the console. Localhost h2 console. Let me get the name of the URL actually of our database and then connect to that. Okay, so we have the table users. We don't have the table users. Oh, be careful when you click, it will append more like the table name. Okay, so just that, and it is empty. Super cool. Let me get the postman. Why white? I don't like the white. Let me just switch to things dark. Oh, thank you. Okay, so let's take a look on these. I don't want these. And yeah, so on our DTO request, we are expecting a name, email, and password. Name, email, password. Okay, super cool. It created, and yeah, I can see my password here. Okay, this is mine, right? It doesn't matter. So let's call these users and let's try some ID like ID number one, because probably any database has an ID at least number one. And let's take a look, and oh, super cool, I can see the password of that user. So why this is happening? Because we are responding with our entity, right? So now let's switch back to, instead of returning our entity, to return the DTO we created specific for response. Let's see if it works. Let's run once again. So let's try once again. And now, oh, take a look on this. I don't have now the password, neither the created at, right? So we just have the name and email, which is defined on our response DTO. So now if we try to hack our API, it will just get rid of that. So yeah, that's pretty much for today's video. I really hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I had a really great time recording that. So that's it. Please subscribe to the channel if it makes sense for you. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Please share with your colleagues if you think this is helpful somehow. And hit the bell icon to stay tuned for the upcoming videos. See you on the next one. Bye bye.